Silver Apples sounded less like a rock band in 1968 and more like two guys who accidentally intercepted signals from a UFO and decided to make a record about it. And the weird part? A huge chunk of modern electronic music still sounds like they're chasing Silver Apple's ghost. The late 1960s was already weird. Psychedelic music was everywhere. The Beatles were making records that sounded like a dream you might have after eating expired cheese. It was just all beautiful chaos. But even in that world, Silver Apples sounded completely alien. Their debut album, just called Silver Apples, came out in 1968. And if you dropped the needle on it back then, you probably would have checked your stereo system to see if it was broken. Because instead of the popular blues riffs or flower child musings, you got buzzing oscillators, mechanical pulses, and a rhythm that sounded like a robot trying to dance in combat boots. But here's the really wild part: they built most of their machines themselves. The band was basically two people: Simeon Cox, who operated a homemade electronic machine he called the Simeon, and drummer Danny Taylor, who drummed like he was trying to outrun the apocalypse. No fancy Moogs yet, no giant synth rigs like the later prog bands had. Simeon literally wired together military surplus parts, switches, and oscillators into the giant electronic monster that looked like a Cold War science project. Today, that sounds normal because everybody's got a laptop full of synth plugins. But in 1968, this was madness. Most electronic music back then lived in universities or experimental art places where serious men in turtlenecks made beeping noises and called it sonic exploration. Silver Apples dragged electronic music into rock music. They took those Cold War machines and gave them groove, repetition, and attitude. You can hear the future all over this album. Tracks like Oscillations feel almost impossible for that time period. The pulsing rhythm sounds like proto techno. The droning repetition feels connected to krautrock before krautrock really exploded. There are moments that sound weirdly close to bands like Suicide, Stereolab, Portishead, and even early industrial music. And remember, this album came out the same year as Hendrix's Electric Ladyland, the Beatles' White Album, and The Doors' Waiting for the Sun. 1968 was overloaded with giant records. Yet, Silver Apples sounded like they should have come 15 years later. Honestly, if you played parts of this album for somebody without context, they might guess early 1980s electronic music, early 80s underground synth music, not 1968, not Woodstock era America, not the year that your parents were probably driving around in a giant boat sized car with no seat belts while smoking cigarettes indoors. But that's what makes this album so fascinating. It didn't just sound ahead of its time, it sounded like it was disconnected from time completely. And yet, hardly anybody bought it, which brings us to the great cosmic joke of music history. Being first, often it means being ignored. Silver Apples were too electronic for the rock audience and too rock for the electronic audience. That's usually the fate of innovators. They become strange puzzle piece that nobody knows where it goes until decades later when everybody suddenly claims they were geniuses all along. And yeah, they were absolutely influential. You can draw a line from Silver Apples to krautrock bands like Can and Neu, Then forward into synth-pop, industrial, post-punk, and modern electronic music. Bands like Suicide clearly picked up on the idea that repetitive electronic minimalism could still feel hypnotic and dangerous. You hear echoes of Silver Apples in early Depeche Mode, Broadcast, Stereolab, and even Nine Inch Nails if you squint hard enough and stand near a strobe light. Portishead especially feels spiritually connected to this album. That eerie, loop heavy mood, the sense that the machine itself is emotionally unstable. Even modern indie electronic artists owe something to Silver Apples, whether they know it or not. The idea that a repetitive electronic pulse could carry emotion and not just novelty, Silver Apples helped prove that. And here's the thing I love most about the album, it still sounds weird. A lot of experimental albums from the 1960s still feel kind of quaint, like a science fair volcano that no longer erupts. Historically important, sure, but not exactly dangerous. Silver Apple still feels dangerous. There's something unsettling about the simplicity of it. The loop keeps repeating like a machine caught in a dream. Simeon's vocals aren't polished or traditionally pretty. They drift through the songs like transmissions from someone caught inside the circuitry of the machines. It feels human and mechanical at the same time. That combination became the emotional blueprint for so much later electronic music. Think about it. Daft Punk built entire careers around the tension between humans and machines. Radiohead's Kid A era explored emotional isolation through electronics. Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails turned machine textures into emotional collapse. Silver Apples were already poking at those ideas, while most rock bands were standing around arguing who was going to play the tambourine. But innovation has a price. The band's career derailed primarily because of terrible luck. One of their album covers featured the group standing in front of a Pan Am jet. Then, horrifyingly, a real plane crash involving Pan Am happened around the same time, and the record label panicked. Distribution got messy. Momentum disappeared. The band slowly faded into cult status. And honestly, cult status is usually code for your favorite musician likes them, but you've never heard of them. Still, their reputation grew over time because musicians kept discovering the album and going, wait, this existed in 1968? That reaction still happens today. The first time I heard Silver Apples, I genuinely thought someone had mislabeled the release date. My brain kept trying to place it as later, maybe 1977, 1981, but no, 1968, right there on the record jacket in black and white. And maybe that's the best way to describe this record. A band with homemade electronics accidentally invents pieces of synth pop, industrial, electronic rock, and minimalist repetition years before those genres fully existed, then disappears before most people even catch up. That's Silver Apples. They weren't polished or mainstream. They weren't trying to make important art. They just sounded obsessed, curious, weird in the best possible way. And honestly, that's where the sound of the future usually comes from. Have you ever heard of the Silver Apples? Are you familiar with them at all? Let us know in the comments. I'll have some great links down below in the description for you, so check those out. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.